What happens when one of Hollywood's most composed actors loses his cool on live television? The answer unfolded in real time during what was supposed to be a routine morning show appearance, and what viewers witnessed was anything but ordinary. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrity interviews going off the rails. Now, let's dive into what actually happened. George Clooney settled into the familiar setup of the Today Show studio, the kind of environment he had navigated hundreds of times throughout his career. Hoda Kotb sat across from him with her notes prepared, ready to discuss his latest project. The cameras rolled, the red lights blinked on, and millions of viewers tuned in for what they assumed would be another polished promotional appearance. "George, thank you so much for being here." Hoda began with her characteristic warmth. "We're so excited to talk about your new film, but I actually want to start with something else that's been making headlines." Clooney's expression remained pleasant, though there was a slight shift in his posture. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "There's been a lot of talk lately about your production company and some of the choices you've made regarding who gets cast in your films," Hoda said, her tone still friendly but pointed. "Some critics have said you talk about diversity, but your actual hiring practices tell a different story. How do you respond to that?" The question landed with more weight than the typical morning show softball. Clooney paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I think that's a mischaracterization of what we actually do. If you look at the full scope of our projects over the last decade, you'll see we've been incredibly intentional about representation both in front of and behind the camera." "But your last 3 films had predominantly white casts," Hoda pressed, flipping through her notes. "And when we look at your director choices, your cinematographers, your writers, the numbers don't really match the rhetoric." "I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just saying what the data shows." Clooney's famous charm was beginning to crack. "Hoda, with all due respect, I don't think you're looking at the complete picture here. We don't make casting decisions based on checking boxes. We hire the best people for each role, and we've worked with incredibly talented artists from every background." "The best people for the role," Hoda repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "That's the same explanation we've heard from Hollywood for decades, George. At what point does that become an excuse rather than an explanation?" "It's not an excuse when it's the truth," Clooney replied, his voice taking on an edge. "I've spent my entire career advocating for change in this industry. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've used my platform to shine a light on injustice. So to sit here and have my record questioned like I'm part of the problem is frustrating." Hoda leaned forward slightly. "But that's exactly the conversation people want to have. You can be someone who has done good work and still have blind spots. Those two things can exist simultaneously. The question is whether you're willing to examine those blind spots." "I examine them constantly," Clooney said, his tone sharpening. "What you're doing right now feels less like journalism and more like a gotcha moment for ratings." The studio seemed to grow quieter, the crew behind the cameras exchanging glances. This was not going according to the pre-planned script. "That's not fair," Hoda responded, maintaining her composure. "I'm asking you questions that your own peers in the industry are asking. If this feels like an attack, maybe that says something about the questions themselves. Or maybe it says something about how you're framing them," Clooney shot back. "You invited me here to talk about a film that actually does address these exact issues. A film that I spent 3 years of my life making because I care about these topics. But instead of having that conversation, you want to play prosecutor." "I want to have a real conversation," Hoda insisted. "Not a promotional interview where we pretend everything is perfect. Real conversations are uncomfortable sometimes. You, of all people, have said that in your own interviews about journalism and accountability." Clooney exhaled sharply, clearly trying to rein in his frustration. "Fine, let's have a real conversation then. What specifically do you want to know?" "I want to know if you think you've done enough." Hoda said directly. Not compared to other people in Hollywood, but compared to what's actually needed. Do you think your efforts have been sufficient? The question seemed to strike a nerve. Sufficient according to whom? According to Twitter, critics who tear down anyone who tries to do anything? According to people who've never put themselves on the line for a cause? I don't know how to answer that question in a way that won't be twisted into something else. According to your own standards, Hoda clarified. You've been vocal about what Hollywood should be doing. By your own standards, have you done enough? Clooney stared at her for a long moment. No one has done enough. That's the whole point. This is ongoing work. But what I don't appreciate is the implication that I'm somehow a hypocrite, because the pace of change isn't fast enough for everyone's liking. I never called you a hypocrite, Hoda said calmly. You didn't have to, Clooney replied. The questions do it for you. This is exactly why people stop trying. Because no matter what you do, it's never enough. And the people who do nothing get to sit back and critique those who are actually in the arena. But you chose to be in the arena, Hoda countered. You chose to be a public figure. You chose to speak out on these issues. That invites scrutiny. That's part of the deal. Scrutiny is fine, Clooney said, his voice rising slightly. But this isn't scrutiny. This feels like a setup. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder if coming here was a mistake. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Hoda maintained her professional demeanor, but there was a determination in her expression. George, I understand you're frustrated, but these are important questions that deserve answers. Your influence in Hollywood is undeniable. How you use that influence matters. And I'm telling you that I use it responsibly, Clooney insisted. I'm telling you that the work speaks for itself if people actually bother to look at it honestly instead of cherry-picking data to fit a narrative. Then help me understand the full picture, Hoda said. Walk me through your decision-making process. How do you decide who to hire? What factors go into those choices? Clooney seemed caught between wanting to defend himself and wanting to disengage entirely. It's complicated. Every project is different. Every role has different requirements. We consider talent, experience, vision, chemistry, availability, and yes, we absolutely consider representation. But we don't reduce human beings to demographics. No one is asking you to reduce anyone to demographics, Hoda responded. But when the end result keeps looking the same, despite all the stated good intentions, people have a right to ask why. The end result doesn't look the same, Clooney protested. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Then show me, Hoda said, her voice steady and unwavering. Show me where I'm wrong. Because from where I'm sitting, looking at the research our team did, the pattern is pretty clear. Clooney's frustration was becoming more visible. Your team did research? Over what period? Looking at what metrics? Because if you're just counting faces and putting them into categories, you're missing the entire point of what authentic representation actually means. We looked at your last 5 major projects, Hoda explained. We looked at cast demographics, crew demographics, and story perspectives. We also looked at pay disparities and whose names appear above the title. That's not just counting faces, George. That's examining power structures. Power structures, Clooney repeated, almost incredulously. Hoda, I don't know what kind of interview you think this is, but I came here to talk about a film, not to be interrogated about power structures like I'm testifying before Congress. You've interrogated plenty of people about power structures in your documentaries, Hoda pointed out. You've held politicians accountable. You've questioned corporate leaders. Why is it different when the questions are directed at you? The comparison seemed to hit harder than the previous questions. Clooney's expression shifted, a flash of something, anger perhaps, or recognition, crossing his features. Because those documentaries were about systemic failures that harm vulnerable people. We're talking about casting choices in movies. We're talking about who gets opportunities in a multi-billion-dollar industry. Hoda corrected. We're talking about whose stories get told and who gets to tell them. That affects vulnerable people too. You've said that yourself in previous interviews. I have said that, Clooney acknowledged, his voice tight. And I believe it. But what you're doing right now isn't about elevating those conversations. This is about making me into a villain for your audience. That's not what I'm doing, Hoda insisted, her tone firm but not aggressive. What I'm doing is asking you to reconcile your public statements with your actual practices. That's fair game. Fair game, Clooney muttered, shaking his head. You know what's interesting? When I stay silent, people criticize me for not using my platform. When I speak up, people say I'm performative. When I make films about important issues, people say I'm profiting off of pain. There's literally no way to win. Maybe winning isn't the point, Hoda suggested. Maybe the point is doing the right thing, regardless of whether you get credit for it. Clooney laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's easy to say when you're the one asking the questions. You get to be the moral authority here without having to defend any of your own choices. My choices aren't the subject of this interview, Hoda replied. But if you want to know, yes, I think about these issues constantly in my own work. I think about who we book, whose stories we prioritize, how we frame our coverage. It's an ongoing process of examination, and I don't always get it right. At least you admit that, Clooney said. But you're still sitting here acting like you figured something out that I haven't, like you're enlightened and I'm problematic. I don't think I'm enlightened, Hoda said, her voice softening slightly but maintaining its resolve. And I'm not saying you're problematic. I'm saying that you're a powerful person in Hollywood, and powerful people should be willing to answer difficult questions about how they use that power. I have answered difficult questions, Clooney countered. For decades, I've been transparent about my process, my values, my mistakes. But this doesn't feel like a genuine inquiry. This feels like you decided what the story was before I even sat down. The story is whatever emerges from this conversation, Hoda responded. Right now, what's emerging is that you're very defensive about being asked to examine your own role in the very systems you critique. Defensive? Clooney repeated, his voice rising again. Yeah, I'm defensive, because you're twisting everything I say. You're taking years of work and reducing it to some kind of hypocrisy narrative. That's not journalism, Hoda. That's activism disguised as journalism. The accusation hung in the air. Hoda's expression hardened. Activism disguised as journalism? George, asking powerful people tough questions is literally the definition of journalism. Just because you don't like the questions doesn't make them illegitimate. They're not tough questions. They're loaded questions. Clooney shot back. There's a difference. A tough question seeks truth. A loaded question seeks a specific answer that supports a predetermined conclusion. Then give me a different answer, Hoda challenged. Give me something beyond defensiveness. Help me understand why the criticism you're receiving is unfair. Clooney leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. You really want to know? Fine. The criticism is unfair because it ignores context. It ignores the realities of financing films, of insurance requirements, of international markets, of distribution deals. It ignores the fact that every single project involves hundreds of compromises, and sometimes those compromises mean you can't do everything you want to do exactly how you want to do it. So you're saying the system prevents you from making more diverse choices? Hoda asked. I'm saying the system makes it harder, Clooney clarified. And instead of acknowledging that complexity, instead of recognizing that people are trying to work within a broken system to make it better, we just eat our own. We attack the people who are actually trying. But George, that's the excuse that's been used forever, Hoda pressed. The system is broken, so we can't change anything. Meanwhile, other filmmakers are finding ways to make it work. Other production companies are achieving the diversity that you say is so difficult? How are they doing it if the system is so restrictive? Maybe they're not dealing with the same scale of projects, Clooney suggested. Maybe they're not trying to get theatrical releases in 100 countries. Maybe they're working with different financial models. You can't compare everything apples to apples. Or maybe they're just prioritizing it differently, Hoda said quietly. Maybe they're willing to make different compromises than you are. The implication was clear, and Clooney's face flushed. That's a hell of a thing to say. You're basically accusing me of not caring enough. I'm pointing out that other people are finding solutions to the same problems you're describing as insurmountable, Hoda clarified. That's not an accusation. That's an observation. An observation that implies I'm not doing enough, Clooney said, which brings us right back to where we started. No matter what I do, it's not enough. No matter how many barriers I push through, someone will point to someone else who pushed through different barriers and say, I should have done what they did. Maybe that's because there's always more that can be done, Hoda suggested. Maybe being uncomfortable with that reality is part of the process. Clooney stood up suddenly, the microphone cord pulling taut. You know what? I don't need to be lectured about being uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable my entire career. I've taken risks. I've spoken out when it wasn't popular. I've lost jobs for it. But I'm not going to sit here and be told that my efforts are meaningless because they don't meet some impossible standard. No one said your efforts are meaningless, Hoda responded, remaining seated but alert. George, please sit down. We're having a conversation. This isn't a conversation, Clooney said sharply, reaching up to remove his microphone. A conversation requires good faith from both parties. This is a prosecution, and I'm done being the defendant. If you leave now, you're proving everyone right who says you can't handle criticism, Hoda said, her voice calm but pointed. Clooney paused, his hand still on the microphone. That's manipulative. It's honest, Hoda countered. You've built your brand on being the guy who stands up for what's right, who doesn't back down, who faces difficult truths. But when those truths are about you, suddenly it's too much? These aren't truths, Clooney insisted, his voice strained. These are interpretations, these are narratives, and I get to decide whether I participate in my own character assassination. Character assassination? Hoda's eyebrows raised. George, I've asked you about your hiring practices. That's not character assassination. That's accountability. Accountability for what? Clooney demanded, his voice echoing slightly in the studio. For not being perfect? For not single-handedly fixing an entire industry? For making creative decisions that you've decided aren't good enough? For the gap between what you say and what you do, Hoda answered evenly. That's all. Just explain the gap. There is no gap, Clooney insisted, his frustration boiling over. That's what you're not hearing. You've created this gap in your mind because you need there to be one. You need me to be the hypocrite, so this interview has a point. I need you to answer the question, Hoda said firmly. Why do your last 5 projects have the demographic breakdown that they do? That's it. That's the question. No tricks, no traps. Just explain your choices. Clooney stared at her, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. My choices were based on the best people for each role. That's my answer. That's always my answer. If you don't like that answer, I don't know what else to tell you. But who decides who the best people are? Hoda pressed. Who's in the room making those decisions? Because if it's the same people making the same kinds of choices, of course you're going to get the same kinds of results. We have diverse voices at the table, Clooney said, though his convictions seemed to waver slightly. Do you? Hoda asked. Or do you have 1 or 2 diverse voices who get outvoted by the majority? There's a difference between having representation and having actual power to influence decisions. Clooney's face tightened. Now you're questioning whether the people I work with have real power? You don't know anything about how my production company operates. You don't know who has influence and who doesn't. You're right, I don't know, Hoda acknowledged. That's why I'm asking. Help me understand. Walk me through a specific casting decision. Tell me who was in the room and how the conversation went. I'm not going to do that, Clooney said flatly. Those are private, creative conversations. I'm not going to expose my collaborators to public scrutiny just to satisfy your curiosity. Even if it would answer the questions people have? Hoda asked. Especially then, Clooney replied, because those people didn't sign up for this. They're not public figures. They're artists and professionals who deserve to do their work without being dissected on morning television. But you're willing to have them questioned privately, in rooms where only certain people have access, Hoda observed. You're willing to have those conversations behind closed doors. You're just not willing to have them in public, where people can actually see how decisions get made. That's how the creative process works, Clooney said, exasperation creeping into his voice. You can't create by committee. You can't make art by consensus. You have to make choices, and sometimes those choices won't please everyone. I'm not talking about pleasing everyone, Hoda clarified. I'm talking about examining the patterns in your choices. When the same kinds of people keep getting chosen, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern, and patterns reveal priorities. My priority is making good films, Clooney stated emphatically. Films that matter. Films that say something. That's always been my priority. And who decides what matters? Hoda asked. Who decides what stories are worth telling? Or maybe change is slower and harder than people want it to be, Clooney countered. Maybe real, lasting change doesn't happen in 5 years. Maybe it takes decades of consistent effort. That's fair, Hoda conceded. But it's also convenient, because it means you never have to be accountable in the present. You can always say, wait, just wait. You'll see the impact eventually. Meanwhile, people who are waiting for opportunities now don't have decades. Clooney's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I've given people opportunities. I've opened doors. I've advocated for people. But I can't give everyone everything all at once. No one is asking you to give everyone everything, Hoda said. But people are asking why certain people keep getting more opportunities than others. Those doors are closed because of studio executives and financiers and market forces that I don't control. Clooney argued. I'm one person. I have influence, yes, but I don't run Hollywood. But you can reshape your corner of it, Hoda suggested. You have a production company. You have relationships. You have leverage. The question is how you use that leverage. I disrupt it every chance I get, Clooney said, his voice strained. But disruption has costs. It means harder financing. It means smaller budgets. So sometimes you have to play the game a little bit to stay in the game long enough to actually change it. And in the meantime, the people waiting for their chance just have to keep waiting, Hoda said softly. Something in Clooney seemed to snap. He yanked the microphone pack from his belt with enough force that it clattered onto the floor. You know what? I'm done. I came here in good faith, and you've turned this into an ambush. This isn't journalism. This is a hit piece, and I'm not going to participate in it anymore. George, we're live, Hoda reminded him, though her expression showed no trace of panic. Good, Clooney said sharply, already moving toward the edge of the set. Let them watch. Let them see what passes for journalism these days. Or let them see how someone reacts when they're asked to defend their choices, Hoda called after him. Clooney turned back, his face flushed with anger. There is no contradiction. You've invented one. You've taken selective data and crafted a narrative, and now you're upset that I won't validate it. Well, I won't. I refuse. Then what are you so angry about? Hoda asked, her voice cutting through his fury with unexpected calm. If there's no contradiction, if your record speaks for itself, why are you this upset? The question seemed to freeze Clooney in place. For a moment, he looked like he might respond, but instead, he shook his head slowly. This is exactly the problem, he said. his voice lower now but no less intense. You ask questions that have no good answers. Questions designed to make someone look bad no matter what they say. It's only a trap if you can't be honest, Hoda replied. If you can honestly say you've examined your choices and you're satisfied with them, then say that. Own it. I'm not running, Clooney said, though he was literally steps away from leaving the set. I'm refusing to participate in my own public shaming. No one is shaming you, Hoda said, standing now. People are asking questions. That's all. If you can't handle questions about your work, then maybe you're not the advocate you claim to be. The words hit like a physical blow. Clooney's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. The studio crew remained frozen, cameras still rolling. Finally, Clooney found his voice. I've spent 30 years being an advocate. I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. My work speaks for itself. And if that's not good enough, then nothing ever will be. With that, he turned and walked off the set, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet studio. Hoda watched him go, her expression unreadable, before turning back to the camera. We'll be right back, she said calmly, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't just completely derailed what should have been a routine promotional interview. The screen cut to commercial, but the impact of what viewers had just witnessed was already spreading. An interview meant to promote a film had instead exposed something far more raw: the difficulty of being held accountable, the tension between intention and impact, and the uncomfortable reality that even people who consider themselves allies can struggle when their own choices are questioned. So what do you think? Was Hoda right to push him that hard? Or did she cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more stories like this. Seriously, hit that subscribe button right now, and comment with your answer. When is it okay for journalists to challenge celebrities on live television? And when does it go too far?